Hey everybody, Cowboy Economist here. I'm doing the cowboy getup because you guys seem to like it so much. Today we're going to talk about Marxism again, and I'm calling this Identifying the Threat. So we're going to be talking about some economics concepts, and I know your eyes are about to glaze over. They already did. So if you're going to lose focus, just take a real cool look at my gun belt, right? My awesome gun, my super sexy bull, my super sexy bear, maybe my butt, up to you. All right, so we need to identify this toxic poison that we have in our country called Marxism. And we start with what I would say are three things. Two of them are definitive Marxism. The first is seizing the means of production, and the second is the redistribution of wealth. And the third I would like to talk about that I think we need to add to that for our identification purposes is the processes by which these things occur. So central to all of this is something that Karl Marx called surplus value, or what most of us would just call productivity. This is where you take a person's labor, you take the means of production, say machinery, manufacturing equipment, and necessary materials, and you manufacture something, and what goes into that process costs a lot less than what comes out of it. So you take a guy who makes nails, you take a nail press machine, and you take $100 worth of iron, and it goes through the process, and $1,000 worth of nails come out. So you've taken $100 worth of iron and turned it into $1,000 worth of nails, and the $900 that is the surplus is called the surplus value, and it is what a corporation or a company or a person would sell to make a profit. So when Marxists talk about seizing the means of production, they want to take the means of production so that they can capture the surplus value for themselves or for the government. And when they talk about redistribution of wealth, they're talking about redistributing that productivity. In our society, you make a agreement with an employer, and you go in and you use their means of production, you work on their materials, and the surplus value is dividedly according to your contract. You get a portion of it as your wage, and the company gets a portion of it after sales as profit. To the Marxist, this is evil. This is not the way it should be. And so that's means of production and redistribution of wealth. So now, let's talk about the processes that I'm concerned about. So, Marxists go about this in a number of ways that are highly volatile and damaging to a society. They lie about it, they commit violence in the furtherance of it, and part of identifying them, we need to be able to look at some, what they're doing, whether or not they just want a person just wants a social safety net, or whether a person is willing to do really terrible things to get that social safety net. So if you look at some of the Bernie supporters from Bernie's campaign, there's video captured of them talking about murdering landlords, putting people who don't think the way they want them to up against a wall and shooting them. Basic violence. Talked about burning cities if Bernie was not given the nomination. So that's part of their process, right? And processes like that are a hallmark of authoritarian regimes of any sort of political government style that all of us are afraid of, unless, of course, you're the one committing them. On a lower level, I would take a look at what people around us are doing. So, for example, we've had a whole bunch of people rioting in cities and burning cities down and looting and stealing and all this kind of crap. Well, you have a media, and you have perhaps friends of yours, I know I have quite a few on social media, that either downplay or deny the violence altogether. They try to say that arson isn't violence. They ignore the fact that 3 officers were blinded with lasers. They ignore the fact that, say, 59 officers in one evening in Washington, D.C. were injured trying to stop rioters. They ignore the Portland protesters hitting cops with hammers, throwing bricks, setting buildings on fire with people in them. They ignore all that, and that's part of the process. And there's a huge amount of dishonesty there, right? And now, say like in Portland, the federal government strikes a deal with Portland that Portland is actually going to enforce its laws and stop this violence that's occurring, and the federal government will back its people off. And now the narrative is the violence is stopping, not because Portland is finally enforcing its laws, but because the federal government is leaving, right? So, and this is the corruption that you need to look for in the process of these Marxists. So for weeks we've been being told that there is no violence, or the violence is almost nothing. And now the narrative is shifting to, well, there was violence, but it was his fault, and this is the proof. So that's how we identify our threat. We look for the hallmarks of Marxism: seizing the means of production and the redistribution of wealth. And we look at the processes that these people are going through in order to force something on us that we don't want, such as violence and misrepresentation of facts and lies. And that's how we identify the threat.